Shalom and welcome to Nazarene Israel. I'm Norman Willis, and welcome to our Genesis 35 Alliance Parasha series, where we focus on what it will take for Judah and Joseph to stop their respective rebellions and acknowledge the de facto Genesis 35 and verse 11 alliance, which already exists today in preparation for the coming Jewish millennial reign. And as we'll see in our upcoming documentary for the Prime Minister and the Knesset, this biblical sod level Genesis 35 and verse 11 alliance already exists. It is what causes the great nation of Judah to lead a company of not Esavite Christian nations, but the Josephite Christian nations in tow. And this is what we call the Genesis 35 and verse 11 alliance. And it is the basis for the generally more positive political relationships that we see worldwide between Israel and the Protestant Christian nations. And there's a lot we're going to say about that in future videos. But if Judah and Levi will look, they might find that while the relationship, of course, stands a lot of room for improvement, some things were done wrong in the past, whatever you can say, there's still generally a much more positive political climate in the Protestant Christian nations than in the Esavite Christian nations, which have an orientation more towards Rome. And this generally more positive political relationship between Israel and the Protestant Christian nations is because of what Elohim himself established in Bereshit or Genesis chapter 35 and verse 11. We need to tumble to it. This is where Judah's mind starts to melt, and we'll talk about where the Christian minds melt later. Because Judah ironically venerates the human wisdom of the rabbis, which is so much better, of course. The Talmud is so much better than the wisdom of Yahweh Elohim Tsevaot in the written Torah and in the Tanakh. Are you crazy? To Joseph, this is the most insane thing we've ever heard. We always assumed you studied the Tanakh. Now we come to find out you use the Tanakh as an excuse to replace the Tanakh with your Talmud. And Judah tells people not to read Elohim's words. Guess why? Because if they read Elohim's words, they're going to see, oh, those conflict with the Talmud. Oh, could it be the Talmud conflicts with Elohim's words?
We don't learn Tanakh in our schools because it's very deep and things can be misinterpreted. So they don't teach us Tanakh. We learn Talmud. We learn what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh. So if I would want to go into Yeshaya, what you call Isaiah, I would go to my Rebbe and I'd ask him to teach it to me. Like everything I don't understand and ask him to teach it to me. But things that I wasn't taught in school because I was told that it's deep to understand, I for sure want to just read texts and like.
With all the earthly respect, brothers, to Joseph, this is like the most insane thing we've ever heard. For sure, we will not read Elohim's words. For sure, we will only read man's words. Oh, especially those words that replace and invert the words of Elohim, so that we end up breaking Genesis 12 and verse 3, which tells us not to curse other Israelites, such as our brothers in Joseph. But you think there are no more Josephite tribes because you don't read the Tanakh, you only read the Talmud. So you don't believe Elohim's words, right? You only believe in your own words, right? Meaning effectively that you worship yourselves rather than Elohim, right?
I just want to say this to our Christian friends, you know, just to call it as it is and say it straight out, you know, you guys are worshiping one Jew. That's a mistake. You should be worshiping every single one of us because we all die for your sins every single day. And that's exactly what's going on here. Yeah. We're all God's firstborn, and we're dying for your sins right now because the Jewish people in the land of Israel are the bulwark against the orcs. Okay? The orcs are coming not to a theater near you, but to your home.
Listen, with all the earthly respect, Esav didn't want us reading scripture in his house either. Okay, that's why we left. We made that decision as a house more than 500 years ago now, more than 10 Jubilee cycles. And now we see Judah getting ready to exterminate Joseph because Judah doesn't want to recognize the difference biblically between Joseph and Esav. And this is just like you refuse to acknowledge Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 through 26, which tell us plainly that Mashiach Nagid had to come at the end of the Second Temple period. Because verse 26 tells us Mashiach Nagid had to be cut off, but not for himself, before the Second Temple was destroyed in 3830 or 70 CE. But you just can't let yourselves see that, can you? Because what would that mean for your sacred traditions? And what would it mean for the Holy Talmud? What would it mean if you had to acknowledge that the Tanakh tells us that Mashiach came near the end of the Second Temple period and that there are two different kinds of Christians, Esav and Joseph? And later we'll see how Hosea 2 in verse 2 or 1 in verse 11 in Notes Bibles, it says that the day is coming soon when the Almighty is going to gather together the children of Judah and the children of Israel, or Joseph, or Ephraim. We're going to be gathered together, and we shall appoint for ourselves one head, meaning one government leader. And we shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. And that refers to the great seeding of the great Assyrian diaspora back in 3038 or 722 BCE, when the king of Assyria came in and took Israel into spiritual and physical captivity. And in the Abraham Accords series, we'll talk about the new Davidic government that will unify all 12 or 13 tribes of Israel in the land of Israel, no matter what the Talmud says and no matter what the so-called oral Torah says. If it conflicts with Elohim's words, it conflicts with Elohim's words. Judah and Levi need to wake up to that fact, realize who they say they serve. Now, once we have obeyed Elohim's will, once we have established the Jewish millennial reign that's called for together, then we will finally be in a position to help cousin Ishmael. And Esav is going to have to defect. Basically, there's no saving the red horse. So as we'll see in the documentary series, there is so much to do to prepare for this monumental biblical reunion that is coming. And we need to get ready because it's coming in only 2 or 3 more generations and 2 more big wars. We need to get ready because it's going to be here before any of us knows it and before any of us is ready. If anyone wants to know the timeline, please check the study Revelation and the End Times. Now, before we head into the parasha, we have a brief, well, we were hoping it would be brief, maybe not so brief, administrative announcement. And several viewers keep asking about what happened with our previous English parasha presenter. We have been trying to avoid the topic completely. We've been trying not to say anything publicly because we're still in prayer for the situation and for all the individuals involved and for Elohim's perfect will. So we thank you for your prayers. We don't feel right sharing too many details publicly at this early stage. However, it is a fair question, and if a lot of people have it, then for the sake of those who want to know, please let us try to explain as briefly as we can and with as few details as we can. But it is an involved answer, and it ties into the parasha. So it's a very important and timely subject. And this will not be popular with men, and especially not with the house of Ephraim. But Elohim commands us to speak the truth in love, so that Elohim will like our speech. He wants us to speak the truth in love, always, at all times. There's never an asterisk except at certain times, or unless you say kol nidre, or unless da. Okay, now, those of you who have followed Nazarene Israel for some time, you know that we are not messianic. We take great pains to set ourselves apart and to separate from the rest of the Messianic and Ephraimite movements. And that's not because we're trying to be holier than thou or anything like that. It's because we're trying to protect ourselves from harm. Because what we see in the Messianic and Ephraimite movements essentially is a different spirit. What we see in our studies is a vast majority of Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 22 Messianics and Ephraimites who are still basically in the lukewarm Babylonian church system. And they're still effectively part of Esav's camp, which is a replacement theology camp. It's a deceptive replacement theology camp. And most of Ephraim that we have met and spoken with and tried to reason together with, they seem unwilling to recognize the parallels between what the Bible says and their condition today. Meaning when you try to tell them, okay, this is where we are right here on this verse, this chapter, this page, this verse right here in Scripture, they're not interested to find out because we can't offer them a broad, easy road. All we can offer them is a narrow and afflicted path unto life. But they don't want it because there's others who are promising a broad, easy road with less obedience, less work, free sacrifices. Okay, and we'll let you do the math. But in our estimation, we're talking about basically 99% of the Ephraimites and Messianics, 99% plus of the Ephraimites and Messianics we have met. They're Isaiah 10:22 material. And that's very simply because they say they are Yeshua's disciples, but then they take no discipline to enact his words within themselves and for their lives. So they call themselves disciples, but there's really zero discipline and absolutely zero corporate discipline. They don't do what the renewed covenant says to do. So isn't that what we really call living a lie? Because they want to claim to be Yeshua disciples, but they're not willing to discipline themselves to do all that Yeshua said to do. How is that a disciple? And to make matters worse, then they go basically church shopping. They go shopping for a minister who tell them what they want to hear, and then they'll give to him as a tithing base. And we're going to have to talk about it. So spoiler alert, on the second chapter of the upcoming documentary series for the Prime Minister and the Knesset, we're going to show biblically how there are two different kinds of Christians. Now, sorry, you might have to read your Tanakh in order to see that. But there's two different kinds of Christians in Scripture. First, you have a tiny Josephite minority who strive to do 100% of everything that Yeshua and the written Torah and the renewed covenant say to do. And then you have a vast majority who do something else while pretending that's what they're doing. And that's all the difference in the world. You have a tiny minority that wants to be pure and do things the right way. And then you basically have everyone else. And basically 99% of Ephraim seems to think posing is going to be good enough for the son of the living Elohim in the day of judgment. And they seem to think that posing is going to stand you in good stead with your intercessor. But we're standing before the throne and Elohim says, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And we turn to Yeshua to say, please intercede for me because I worked so hard for you. And he says, I don't really know you. What did you do? How did you help me get the kingdom my father sent me to get? We think this kind of ignorance and lazy, willful ignorance is going to get you killed, like in Korach's rebellion. And we do not want to be responsible for anything like that. So we have taken great pains through the years to separate ourselves apart from it. And we believe this strongly enough, literally, to set ourselves apart from the vast majority of the Messianic and Ephraimite movement. We believe that they are on the wrong road and that they need to change course unless they want to be punished or killed. And we see in Scripture, if you want, check the Revelation and the End Times study or Revelation Simplified on YouTube. We're looking at a situation, we're not exactly sure how many, but we're looking at a probable scenario, 85 to 90%, probably more like 90%, will be killed effectively for having and living and practicing a wrong spirit. Oh, but everyone has the spirit. Oh, but everyone knows as good as Yeshua. Oh, but everyone is as much as Paul, right? Okay, so now Judah subverts the written Torah of Yahweh just by full-on replacing it with the Talmud. It's just wholesale replacement. And they give the nod to the Tanakh, they give the nod to the written Torah, but they don't follow it, and they tell their people not to read it. Okay, now, the difference, here's the difference. Ephraim knows what to do. He just ignores any requirement that isn't easy or free, effectively. If it's not cheap or not too much money, not too much time, sure, they'll send URLs to their friends. Sure, they'll gather together on Shabbat. But we're talking about people who say they are imitating Yeshua, and they're trying to imitate his walk. And when you say that you want to walk, even as Yeshua walked and worshiped, but then you don't do it, isn't that a lie? Okay, you took the immersion, but you didn't want to submit to the spiritual immersion, so the Spirit never came down. The Spirit never fell. Okay, did you feel the Spirit fall? And did your life change at that time or not yet, really? Are you asking, seeking, and knocking still? Or did you forget? Well, there's a reason why Isaiah speaks about Ephraimites being on the bottle. Right? We say, Torah, 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 but then we only do what's easy or free. Okay, we want to make free sacrifices for Yeshua. We'll talk about the error King Shaul let the people make. 1 Samuel 8, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But if we believe the written Torah and the Brit Chadasha, brethren, the renewed covenant, is it okay to be lukewarm for Yeshua? Is it okay to be lukewarm for his Great Commission? Is it okay to be lukewarm for the fivefold ministry and the single foundation of apostles and prophets? Is it okay to be lukewarm about building the kingdom that his father sent him to build? So basically, Nazarene Israel self-imposes a hard requirement to move away from spiritual Korach and his men. If you get my meaning, there's a certain thing we'll talk about in the Four Horses series called the Red Horse. And because Joseph spent time in Esav's house, Joseph needs to take extra special care to separate himself from the red horse and selfish red horse attitudes. Now, if you read the comments section on our videos, you're going to see all the time. What you're going to see is you're going to see Ephraimites basically trying to get us to approve their excuses to not do what Yeshua and the Torah say to do. You can just read the comments. You're going to see people who don't take Yeshua's words to themselves. They read Yeshua's words. They worship Yeshua. They adore Yeshua. They don't want to try to become like Yeshua. That's the difference. You can be a good sheep, or, well, not a sheep. You can be a good goat. You can be a good worshiper and not try to imitate Yeshua. But this is the thing. Any rabbi will know you try to imitate your rabbi. Ephraim is, is kind of like how Judah gives the nod to the Tanakh and then goes and does Talmud. Ephraim gives the nod to the Brit Chadasha and then does what Esav teaches. And the attitude, the spirit is just like doing Yeshua's words as a burden. It's not like the greatest opportunity ever given. Oh no, doing the hard part of Yeshua's words is a burden. So they want us to agree that they don't need to do everything that Yeshua and the written Torah say. And what we're going to see time and again in this series, we're going to see Judah, on the one hand, makes his own standards and says, hey, I'm the kingship tribe. I'm the priestly tribe. I'm so great. I can do whatever I want. I don't need to obey Elohim. Everybody look at us. Everybody obey us. Everybody worship us. That's Judah. Ephraim, brothers, Ephraim seems to want to relax the standards a little. Oh, and they don't see the problem in that. They always want to keep, they say they want to keep Elohim's standards. Oh, but for some reason, we're not keeping Elohim's standards. We're just sort of relaxing Elohim's standards. So how is that functionally different than the Garden of Eden being tempted by the snake? Did Elohim indeed say you have to do everything he says? Did Yeshua indeed say you have to obey everything in the renewed covenant? You have to actually walk according to how Yeshua walked? That there's a reason for that? That there's a need for that? A need? Okay, you're right. Just to be clear, okay, you don't need to keep or guard Elohim's standards in Torah at all. Okay, you don't. It's not necessary. But he doesn't need to take any of us for his bride either. You know what I'm saying? Okay, it is a cooperation contest. Okay, but what most of Ephraim behaves, they treat it like a thing of the world. It's like, how much can I get from Elohim for how little? How much blessing? I'm still saved, right? I'm going to be good in the judgment, right? How little can I give? How little can I do? How much of my life can I still live for me? And it's a hard thing with them when you tell them none. That's what it means to be a slave. That's what it means to be an eved. Your life is no longer about you. Your life is now about helping your master increase and grow. If that's not where your heart is, you're in the wrong movement, kind of. I mean, just to call it like it is, 99% of Ephraim seems to think their election is a done deal and a sure thing. They don't realize we're living in the midst of an ongoing trial and training exercise. There's a need to apply ourselves. There is something to do. There's actually a great commission. There is a need to get involved. Most of Ephraim seems to think his salvation is guaranteed. He doesn't need to work out his salvation in fear and in trembling, as Philippians 2 and verse 12 says to do. Okay, brothers, to be real, there's a problem. If we're not even willing to do the minimums, how does that count as discipleship? Okay, the day of judgment is coming and is going to be a little red hen situation. Yeshua is going to stick up for all those who worked for him and sacrificed for him. We're going to reap what we sowed. Okay, but what if we sow nothing? Or what if we sow less than what our master Yeshua said we should sow? Brothers, if you're a hired hand on a farm, how do you even expect to keep your job as a hired hand on a farm if you sow less than what your master said to sow or the shift leader said to sow? Okay, if the shift leader or the farm owner are not going to be happy with slack performance, why would the king above all kings be pleased with Ephraim's slack or sloth or carelessness? Uncaring. Doesn't care. Because if he cared, he would do it. We picked on Levi and Judah a lot, and the reality is that they need it because most of them, they don't read Elohim's book. I mean, not even the rabbis. You can become an ordained rabbi and not even read the Tanakh completely one time. That's just, oh my. Okay, but this week it's Ephraim's turn. Why? Because Ephraim has a golden opportunity to show Elohim how much we care or not. We have what could be called a once-in-a-house opportunity to do the things that it takes to help us recognize the Genesis 35 alliance, which then establishes the Jewish millennial reign. But there's a job to do, brothers. There's something to do. It's called the Great Commission. And it seems like 99% of Ephraim is content to let someone else do all the hard kingdom-building work. Of course, they plan to enjoy all the fruits of everyone else's labor afterwards, right? Okay, just like in socialism, just like in communism. Okay, let everyone else do all the work, right? Little red hen. Okay, but from Yahweh's perspective, are we thinking Yahweh's a chump? Is that what the problem is? The house of Ephraim thinks Yahweh's a chump? Because from Yahweh's perspective, I would think if I were him, I'd look and see what you have is a bunch of lazy, shiftless, Isaiah 10 and verse 22, slackers who are expecting a retirement check when they never really applied themselves to help the company succeed in the first place. Okay? They're expecting a great big reward for building Yeshua's kingdom when they're leaving Yeshua's kingdom building work undone. And they're leaving the cost of the kingdom building work for someone else to bear. It's like that old saying about how everyone expected that someone would do something, so therefore no one did anything. And that's where the house of Ephraim is at. We think it's this great big temple of stone. And what you have really in the house of Ephraim, you have a bunch of stones strewn about the field that aren't even thinking about getting organized to build a temple. You got great raw materials, but they're not doing nothing with it. And this is why we say Ephraim treats the Great Commission like it's one great big joke. The Great Commission is the great omission. Okay, but one question, brothers, is Yahweh laughing at the death of his son? Is Yahweh laughing that his son died to take our sins, that he would die to give us renewed life and restore us to the commonwealth of Israel? And all he's asking is that we live for him and not for ourselves. Something about if we live for ourselves, if we try to save our life and live our life, we're going to lose it. Does it ring any bells? But it's a parable, we're receiving a mina while the king goes away to receive a kingdom for himself. And in his absence, he gives us something to do. And what are we doing with our mina? I've seen a whole lot of Ephraim burying their minas. I've seen a whole lot of Ephraim investing their minas on themselves. And the proof of this is they blow off Yeshua's minimum standards. They blow off. It's like, oh, well, that verse isn't convenient. And they're expecting a reward for being faithful and loyally establishing their master as king. Yeah. What did you do in the spiritual war to help establish your master as king that you should receive a reward? I think will be the question to come from the throne. So what happens if we don't care about the king? Ouch. What happens if we don't really want to help our king establish his kingdom? What happens if we're not willing to serve as part of his armies? Okay, we'll talk about that in the Brit Chadasha section. Now, granted, Levi is building the wrong kingdom right now. He's building his own kingdom instead of Elohim's kingdom. But take a look. At least Judah and Levi are diligent about it. Okay, what does Ephraim do? What does Ephraim do? Okay, Ephraim reads Elohim's words, mostly Jewish authors, in the Tanakh and in the Brit Chadasha, and then he only does the easy stuff. Doesn't he? Doesn't Ephraim blow off anything hard? Okay, and then he expects a reward for showing up, right? He expects a reward for reading the book and realizing that there's things that he's supposed to do, but he doesn't want to do them. And this is nothing like we see our forefathers doing in the Torah portions each week, right? Because it's different now. Why? Because Ephraim has Yeshua, right? So that's why Ephraim's disobedience to the minimum standards of Scripture is supposed to be excused, right? Okay, well, funny thing, isn't that what Esav also teaches? That you don't have to do everything that Yeshua and the renewed covenant said to do? Or if you're going to be zealous, you should do what the Pope says to do. But isn't that what Esav teaches? You don't have to do it. Oh, we're back to the serpent again. You know, brothers, you got to know Yahweh's sitting back and just seeing who does what and who doesn't. Who's actively involved to help his son receive the kingship he so richly deserves, and who isn't really. And he's recording everything in the book. And to speak the truth in love, because that's our requirement, is to speak the truth in love. The problem is you have a bunch of Isaiah 10 and verse 22 Ephraimites and other associated Messianics who they think they're cool, but the reality is they're playing silly, stupid games with their eternal salvation. What you have is you have a bunch of Joseph's sons with gross entitlement issues. They don't have to. They don't need to. That's not for them. Rules are for other people. Requirements, those are for other people. Those are not for us. Right? Ephraim seems to think that Yahweh owes them a pass for disobeying his son's commandments, for disobeying the words of Mashiach Nagid, Messiah the Prince, Messiah the Director, Messiah the Teller. Oh, and they expect law accolades for doing less than their best? Not even the minimums. Okay, I think Ephraim maybe has forgotten a lot since moving to democracy. Try doing less than your best for King Richard the Lionheart and see how long you make it. Try doing less than your best for King David. See how long you make it. Well, but somehow we have Ephraim thinking that we get to obey Yeshua's minimums. We can party hardy with our minas and still expect a reward for doing less than the words of our king. Are we back in the Garden of Eden, or what is it called, brothers? What do you call that? Okay, if that's not the red serpent snake edging its way in on White Horse territory, what do you call that, and why do you give into it? this is a long time ago, but I was talking with a Ranger Company commander at Fort Lewis, Washington. He was telling me that sometimes his soldiers, they'll snivel about the long hours and the mountain of hard work and the hard conditions. You know, we're in an elite Ranger battalion. Why do we have to get up at 4:30 all the time? Why do we have to do this? Why this particular haircut? Why do we have to do this? And why do we have to do that? And he would always say to his troops, "Troop, you don't have to do any of those things, but you don't have to be a ranger either." And that's what Ephraim needs to understand. You know, we don't need to convert to White Horse. We don't need to leave Esav's house. We don't need to do all we can for Yeshua. He's not going to take a substandard servant. He's definitely not going to take a substandard bride. He's not a chump. Okay? Don't try to chump him. You're not going to pull one off on him. 99% of Ephraim can build on the sand if they want, and he will let you build on the sand. Why? Because who he really wants is he wants the wise ones who listen to him and obey him completely. If you love me, then keep my commandments. And here we have Ephraim doing, that one's too hard. That we'll do this one. We'll do the resting and the reading and the fellowshipping. But the rest of that stuff, that's too hard. So Nazarene Israel is looking for that less than 1% that truly wants to do all they can for Yeshua by his Spirit, out of respect and love for Yeshua. And if you want to do your part in love, then please contact us. But also, please, if you're not that way, okay, then please stop this video and take it to prayer right now. If Elohim's words are not the guiding beacon of your life, then stop this video and take it to prayer right now. Because none of us really knows if we're going to have tomorrow. None of us really knows if we're going to have the next hour from now. So the thing is to get right now, to where we're listening for his voice, doing everything he says, including what he already said, as is recorded in his written Torah, in his Tanakh. You know, and I'll guarantee you the 4,000, the 5,000, the myriads and the multitudes, the crowds and the throngs, they all thought of themselves as disciples. The problem, they weren't willing to do the minimums because they didn't realize how high the minimums were. They didn't realize the cost was full dedication as a servant, like Eliezer was a servant. You lay down your life to serve your master. It's no longer your life. Maybe it's not the luxury to which you would like to become accustomed, but to have him as a master, what is that worth? What in the world are you going to trade away for that? I'm not trading nothing for that. Okay, but for a disciple, your minimum is your maximum. Okay, how much can I do? How much can I, what can I do for you, Master? I have an assistant like that. She's just like, she takes care of stuff. I never even know it happened, right? She's just like trying to do her best. Okay, we have just the initiative that gets taken by some, I'll tell you the stories later. It's already going to be a long parasha. But how many in Ephraim care about Yeshua like that? How many in Ephraim care that Yeshua gets the kingdom he wants the way he specified, the words that he said? Haven't met many. Okay, and Yeshua didn't spend much time with the 4,000, the 5,000, the myriads, the multitudes, the crowds, or the throngs. Because why? Because he needed to spend the vast bulk of his time with that handful who were already choosing to do their utmost to help him receive the kingdom that he deserves. And the first step in that was to start a spiritual military campaign as the spiritual armies of the living Elohim. Why? The purpose was to bring home the lost sheep of the house of Israel, aka Joseph or Ephraim. But what everyone seems to miss in this is that Yeshua established certain protocols for his faithful to follow. Okay, We've all heard of the protocols of the elders of Zion. Okay, forget those. What we have to do is the unified fivefold protocols that Yeshua himself established in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 16. Yeshua himself established these things. So are we going to build on the sand and do something else? Or are we going to build on stone? We're going to build on the rock and actually do what he himself established in the house of Ephraim? Oh, or are we too good for that? That's for other people. Standards, Yeshua's rules, those are for other people. We're already disciples. Thank you very much. So then in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 through 21, he also established a single foundation of apostles and prophets for the Nazarene nation to unify on. And we will see that this is still for today. Are we obeying Yeshua's words, or are we doing our own thing and just calling ourselves like Esavite disciples? Okay, and you got to know, one of these days, someone's going to write a third testament and a third Chronicles and some other books. Okay, now, do you want to help the kingdom become established, brothers? Would you like to see the true fulfillment of the sequel A of Daniel 9, verses 25 through 26? Would you like to serve him? Or would you prefer that your name be recorded as having you sitting on the sidelines, living your life in the world rather than laying it down? Okay, and Yeshua, if you get nothing else, get this. Yeshua is grieved over everyone who doesn't love him enough to do what he says to do. Because why? Because he tells us to do the things that are good for us. Okay? But at the exact same time, he wants the bozo filter. He wants the weed out. He doesn't want a bunch of impure, childish brides who refuse to take responsibility for themselves and their actions. He doesn't want a lot of brides. He just wants a pure one. Okay, so how are we to show him that we are purifying ourselves for him unless we are eagerly and gladly doing all that he says and trying to help others and strengthen weak hands and feeble knees to help establish his kingdom? Okay, and we'll talk about this more in the Abraham Accord series, but Nimrod established Babylon, and their worship structure, their power structure is top down. It's the top down pyramid. We'll talk about the living tree models that Yeshua and his people follow. But basically, the higher you go is actually the lower you go and the more weight you're going to support. And basically what this means is we need leadership. Leadership is all by example. We need leadership to be at the forefront of setting the example, of separating from Esav and not watering down standards. It's the end of days, brothers. It's the end of days. We never did have time for foolishness. I mean, even if you didn't see Matthew 24 knocking on the door, we don't have time for foolishness. And to me, it makes me grievously sad that, 85, 90% of Ephraim won't make it. We tend to think more toward 90%. And why is that? Is because they didn't feel the need to bring their A game for Yeshua. They got excited if they thought maybe they could build a tithing stream for themselves. Other than that, no one wants to participate. Why? Because for one thing, the leadership is following the wrong model. It's still the top-down Esavite model. It's not the bottom-up living tree model that Yeshua came to tell his people to build by. So in Esav, you have a whole bunch of people who are very dedicated and they've got whole power structures and everything, but they're not building the kingdom that Yeshua said. We're trying to do something different in Nazarene Israel. The Protestant realm, you're still not building the kingdom Yeshua said. Messianic, still not. Ephraimite, it gets worse. The closer you get to the Ephraimite and the Messianic movements, the more scattered and the more disorganized you become. And you think of that as a good thing, even though the written Torah says the opposite, even though the renewed covenant says the opposite. And Ephraim, we need you to help us with this. Okay? Help us to understand. How can someone be a disciple of Yeshua's but we won't discipline ourselves to do what Yeshua says to do? Okay, you're reading in the word and it says you need to do this, and then you don't want to do it. But you're a disciple. Okay, does not compute, but the vast majority of Ephraim practices it. Thinks he's doing the whole Torah, even though he knows he's not. Okay, he's just reading, he wants to do the easy stuff. Okay? And just read the comment section. I don't think I have to do what Yeshua says because blah, blah, blah. Insert excuse here. We're not trying to be holier than anyone. We're trying to tell you something here. We're trying to help save people's lives. Can people imagine what that might be? Now, both for Ephraim and for Judah and Levi, Nazarene Israel has gone to great lengths through the years to separate ourselves and to set ourselves apart from the vast majority out there because we see them as impure. We see them as tainted. And we'll talk about the details of this in the Abraham Accord series. But the problem is there's still a separation going on from Esav. It's not complete. A lot of people think the separation is complete, but it's not. We'll talk all about it in the Abraham Accord series. But basically what the church is it's a transitional vehicle for true Ephraim, and it's a big seductive trap for Manasseh and the vast majority of Ephraim who are lost in the Messianic movement. And the problem is that they don't want to purify themselves to do everything Elohim says. Hello? They don't want to purify themselves to do all that the written Torah and Yeshua say. And while Ephraim doesn't decommission the Tanakh in favor of Talmud like Judah does, Ephraim, they don't do it. Ephraim nonetheless fails to obey it. And for reasons we'll explain in the Abraham Accord series and in our studies on the four horses, Nazarene Israel needs to permanently and completely sever all ties with Esav and those in his camp, those who still belong to the Esavite tree, at literally all costs, because it's a purity game. It doesn't matter how many people we lose. It's like with the Passover. You get one speck of leaven in there, and guess what happens? Next generation. So it doesn't sound nice to say, perhaps, but Nazarene Israel chooses not to associate with Messianics. Because why? Because they behave like a different branch of the Esavite tree. And many of their doctrines are functionally the same. And I'm talking about Sabbath and feast Ephraim. Okay, these are people I've spent Sukkot with. These people I've gone to conferences with. Okay, and I don't know how many ministers I've spoken to about the need to do things the way the renewed covenant says, and I never get a reception. Why do you suppose? Cui bono? Yeah, what could it possibly be? Could it possibly be that as long as the money's coming in, no one wants to say anything? Because instead of serving Yeshua, their true goal is to make money serving Yeshua, or make money making it look like they're serving Yeshua, is the real truth. Okay, because why? Because they keep practicing their different replacement theology versions of what Yeshua said to do. How can you have a Hebrew roots version that still manages to miss what Yeshua said to do? Somehow, no one even talks about building Yeshua the kingdom that he asks us to build in the Great Commission. It's like no one even talks about the Great Commission. No one even talks about the requirements of unity in Ephesians chapters 2 and 4. And that's the primary mission. That's the primary thing Yeshua came to set in motion, was bringing back the lost house of Ephraim. How? Through the Great Commission, through the fivefold ministry, through unification on a single foundation of apostles and prophets. But people don't think that's necessary, do they? It's what Yeshua said to do, but no one wants to do it. Do they? And you talk to these leaders and teachers, they have these TV shows and big followings, and you say, shouldn't it look, if we're going to practice the faith once delivered to the saints, shouldn't it look like the first century? You never get an answer back. So apparently, I would say 99% in Ephraim feel that they found a broad, easy road that leads to salvation. Knock, knock. Is Ephraim buddy home? Okay. There's a reason Jude 3 says that it's necessary to practice the original halakha. Okay. There's a reason Yeshua himself gave the fivefold protocols in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 16, or Shaul is relating. And there's a reason Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 through 21, 22, I have to look that up, calls for unity on the foundation of apostles and prophets, or apostles and elders, which is the Beit Din Gadol, which is the Nazarene Council. And the reason why these things are so necessary is that these are precisely the things that can unify the nation of Ephraim as a nation in these end times, so that we can have a stick that can be then joined with the other stick for Judah. Okay, the word stick, we'll look at this later, it means firmness. Okay, it speaks about something solid. Ephraim, there's nothing solid. It's like stone soup right now. Okay, if you're going to be Yeshua's disciple, no pun intended with that. If you're going to be Yeshua's disciple, then don't water down his standards, especially if you're going to try to be a leader, because that's what Esav does. It's also what Judah does. They replace Elohim's words with their own words. We'll talk about Mystery Babylon in the Abraham Accord series. But the point is, it's what most of Ephraim does. Sorry to say, while saying we keep Torah, and they don't. And that's why we have to set ourselves apart from liars, is to stop Esav's creeping crud. We need to shut the red horse out. And if you're going to serve in leadership, we need to shut the red horse out. So please let us leave it there while we continue praying. And we ask that you would please pray with us that all of Judah and all of Ephraim might understand the need to focus on Elohim's words and to maintain Elohim's standards in the written Torah and in the Tanakh, and not to replace the Tanakh and not to replace the written Torah, as Judah does, and as Esav does, and as the vast bulk of Ephraim and the Messianic movement does. We just believe that it's an insult to say that you believe in Yeshua and you want to receive the blessings of his great sacrifice, and then you behave like Esav. And you say, Torah, 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 Torah. We don't like that. And quite frankly, we don't care if no one participates. We don't care if no one tithes. We will not have replacement or relaxing of Elohim's standards. Because why? Because it's Elohim's words, it's Elohim's standards that we're here to uphold. So if that, hopefully we've said enough. We need to move on to the parasha. We're going to be way over time this week. But it was a good question and it needed to be answered. So apparently some things needed to be said. And as we proceed forward through this parasha series, what we're going to see is that the church is structured wrong. Esav is structured wrong. And unless Ephraim wants to leave Esav's house completely, leave the church behind, it's a synagogue model. That's what Yeshua followed. The late Second Temple period synagogue model. It's different. It leads to different results. The Hebrew model is different. We talk about that in Torah government. We'll talk about it also in the Abraham Accords series. Okay, moving on, hopefully, Father willing. Last week in Parasha Bo, we skipped over Shemot or Exodus chapter 12, verses 48 and 49, because we wanted to talk about them this week, because we thought we'd have more time this week. But the subject is physical circumcision, and you might call it one of the hard commandments in the written Torah. It's something physical that needs to be done in order to make the cut, no pun intended. And Shemot chapter 12, verses 48 and 49 tells us that there's only supposed to be one Torah for Judah and Joseph. Okay, so basically throw your Talmud out. Verse 48, and when a stranger or a ger, in this case, Ephraim or Joseph, returning Ephraim, dwells with you and wants to keep the Pesach to Yahweh, let all his males be physically circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as a native of the land. For no physically uncircumcised person shall eat of it. Okay, you want to go eat Easter uncircumcised? Go ahead, leave us out of it. Stay away. Okay, but don't eat the Pesach if any male in your house more than 8 days old is not physically circumcised. Okay, and if you're Christian and you don't understand the requirement for physical circumcision after Yeshua's sacrifice, please read the Nazarene Israel study, or you can also find an excerpt probably in the Pesach study. But verse 49 says one Torah, okay, one law. This is the whole point. When Ephraim comes home, he's got to come back to the full written Torah that was given to Israel through Moshe by Yahweh. There's one Torah and one law shall be for the native born, meaning Judah in this case, and for the Ephraimite ger, or the returning Gentile stranger who dwells among you. Okay, and Levi, notice that it does not say one Talmud for Judah and death and slavery, and sex slavery for the B'nai Noach slaves. As in, what are you thinking? Go back to the Tanakh. Okay. In Ephraim, for our part, we're all up in arms. Treat us the same, treat us the same. Everyone's got to treat us the same. But then we don't do the same. Okay. Let's just compare Ephraim's walk with Judah's. And it's basically a horror show. Take a look. Judah pays all 3 tithes. Judah organizes. Judah raises money for the poor. He takes care of his 3rd tithe responsibilities. Judah even goes undercover generationally to win his political objectives. Okay, this is how dedicated Judah is. He dedicated to the wrong book. He's pointed the wrong direction, but at least he's making great time. Okay, but and it's like that old saying, before climbing the ladder of success, make sure you have it leaning against the correct wall. But at least Judah's climbing. Okay, what does Ephraim do? Now, as an Ephraimite, please let me say that when I compare Judah's dedication with Ephraim's level of dedication, what I see is like a bunch of punk teenagers demanding to be treated like adults when they don't even behave like adults. They're not looking to take care of their responsibilities. They're not looking to make a contribution to others in the community, to strengthen the community, to build up the armies of Elohim. No, Ephraim thinks he's special. Okay? And that's Joseph's overprivileged son, Ephraim. Okay, so how is Judah supposed to tell the difference between Joseph and Esav if Joseph behaves like undisciplined adolescent Esav? Right? And last week we saw in Shemot 12 and verse 51 that Yahweh brought us out of the land of Egypt according to our armies. Meaning what? Meaning he wants us to behave as his armies. Because why? Because he has a kingdom for us to establish, and the army structure is the most efficient for what it is that he wants to do. Plus, he's an Elohim of war. Okay, Judah gets this in spades, right? They're doing the wrong thing with it, obviously, but at least they get it. They get the requirement. They're doing, if they would ask Yahweh, they would be golden. They'd be stellar. But at least Judah's doing something with it. Okay, what's Ephraim's problem? I've told this story before, but I explained all this stuff to a brother in the United States. His wife was literally like coming halfway out of her chair. She was so excited. He's just like, this sounds like a lot of work. I'm just like, how far are you willing to go for Yahweh? Apparently not too far. Okay. So we don't want to be Isaiah 10 and verse 22 material, the wise ones that want to come home and live. So Shemot 16 and verse 2, right? Guess what, Ephraim? Our ancestors grumbled because life in Yahweh's army, it's not convenient. There's hardship. Oh my, oh no, oh no. we no longer get to do what we want. Oh, no. Surprise. Okay, it's kind of like how Ephraim grumbles when you ask him to organize and tithe and support the Great Commission work. Oh, it's not convenient. We don't get to do what we want with our time and our money anymore. You mean like we have to lay our life and our time and our money down to be his servants? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Okay, we want to be his bride. We're basically a slave princess candidate. And Ephraim thinks he's a full queen already ready for coronation. And Ephraim doesn't like hearing about it. Ephraim wants us to speak to him smooth things. Okay, and Ephraim's busy reading Isaiah 28 while drinking. Okay, and he doesn't see the need to leave the spiritual bar. He's just spirits upon spirits upon spirits. Any of them his spirits? Okay, and you know how we know that these are our ancestors, brothers? Because they behave just like us. Right? The sniveling, disobedient fruit that expects a reward for not following his instructions is exactly the same. For not having faith in him, it's exactly the same. For not really doing a stellar job like Caleb or Joshua, it's exactly the same. We want a reward for not doing much. Shemot 17 and verse 7, the place was called Massah, meaning testing, and Merivah, meaning strife or contention, because we strove with the requirements of life in Elohim's army. We thought it was going to be a piece of cake coming out of Egypt and establishing the millennial reign. We thought that was going to be Slack City, milk and honey, woohoo, party. Okay, instead of trusting Elohim to provide for us, if we just submit to his voice, discipline ourselves to be obedient, discipline ourselves to be faithful troops, what do? We rebel against his standards. We try to substitute his standards. Later, we'll see Korach's rebellion, where there's enough of us, we figure, well, we're in the majority. Well, majority rule in democracy, right? There's no mystery Babylon, mystery Babylonian democracy. Can anyone see parallels to today's times? Shemot 17 and verse 16, it tells us, sorry, brethren, we will have war. Oh, but we don't like war. Are you sure we can't just ignore this? Really? War? Oh, no. Okay, brothers, we will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. What does that mean? We'll talk about it more in the Four Horses series, but it means we need to organize and defend ourselves, just like the kind of organization the Torah talks about, just like the kind of organization Yeshua says to do, establishing sanctuary areas, just like the Bible says. Oh, but that takes work. That would take time and money if we're going to do anything real. Okay, so Judah's busy doing the wrong thing, targeting Ephraim. Okay, and most of Ephraim can't understand why that should be, because most of Ephraim's busy looking for excuses why they should be able to live their lives and keep all of their time and their money for themselves. Why do they have to live like servants? Why do they have to discipline themselves to do what Scripture says to do? We're waiting for the clue bird to land. And we see a lot of the same themes continuing in our Haftarah prophetic portion. So that's why we're going long this week. Come to Shoftim or Judges 5 and verse 8. Devorah is talking, very interesting woman. You can read more about her on, I believe it's the Covenant Relationships collection, but just search for Devorah. I'm not sure if it's spelled with a V or a B, but search for Devorah and find the ones in the Covenant Relationships collection. She's talking, she's saying, at least based on the fruit inspector, she's saying that our forefathers in Israel had chosen new gods for themselves. Okay, they weren't serving Yahweh Elohim Tsevaot. They weren't serving Yahweh of armies. Why? Just take a look at the fruit. There's tribes missing. There's a general peacetime mentality. And when there was war in the gates, there was not a shield or a spear that was even seen among 40,000 in Israel. Why? Because they had other priorities than building Elohim's kingdom. They were serving other gods. They weren't serving Elohim. Because why? Because they weren't doing what Elohim said to do. They were not behaving as the armies of the living Elohim. Oh, let me guess. No. They thought maybe other people should be the ones to make all the sacrifices. Or unless, of course, there are sacrifices that are easy or free. But if there's no sacrifices that are easy and simple and free like that, then our forefathers weren't interested. Sound familiar? Anything? Or not our ancestors? No. And we're not like that. No. Okay, Shoftim 4 and verse 9, Devorah was clear that it was not a good thing. Not a good thing. There weren't any real men who wanted to stand up and lead the war. And let's look at today. Judah, they understand that it's war. They get it. They don't understand who their friends are versus their enemies. Okay, but let's forget where's Waldo. Let's forget Judah for a minute. Where's Ephraim? Talk about tribes missing. How many men in Ephraim have a peacetime mentality regarding the Great Commission? Nothing to do, nothing to see here. For how many Ephraimites is it the great omission? We know it's a commandment, right? And we know that Ephesians 2 verses 19 through 21, 22 requires us to be unified on a single foundation of apostles and prophets, or apostles and elders, right? And this kind of unification based on a single unified doctrine is what we see in Maaseh, or Acts chapter 15 and verse 2, is that when there was a question about the doctrine, that everyone came up to the Nazarene. They didn't just go making their own rulings. Oh, we're in this country now, we're going to do this over here. No, that's the Greco-Roman model. That's the Babylonian model. Okay. The Jerusalem model is that when there was a question about the doctrine, everyone came to the Nazarene Sanhedrin, or the Nazarene Beit Din Gadol, so there could be a single ruling, so that they could maintain a single faith, so that then you could have a single nation, because in Scripture, your faith is your nation. Different sects, those are all technically different nations. Or do we conveniently forget that part, that we're supposed to be consistent in our walk? Okay, brothers. How many men in Ephraim have other priorities than doing the bidding of their master and king? How many men in Ephraim have other priorities than building Yeshua's kingdom, which his father sent him to get? Do we understand that Yeshua himself will be the one to intercede for us or not in the day of judgment? And do we understand that many are called, and that only a tiny minority of those who are called will be chosen? Do we get that? It's like Yeshayahu, or Isaiah 28 and verse 1 says, okay, Ephraim, he's on his lips. He's babbling and drinking, and the great tribulation and the day of judgment are approaching. But he thinks he's going to be okay to blow off Yeshua's written standards and the written Torah. Because why? Because there's never been a day of judgment before where all those who blow off Yeshua will be cast into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth before. Right? So no need to get serious. Just take another hit off of Esav's spiritual liquor. You know, jumping off the Empire State Building, that's fun. That's a thrill. There's no harm to it. It's just that sudden stop at the bottom that's going to kill you. And that day of judgment is what Ephraim needs to be thinking of when we investigate our Brit Chadasha, or we read our renewed covenant. So let's go to Matthew chapter 5. And we could talk for hours on this, but we're already way over time. And the thing is, this is the very first words Yeshua said. His very first sermon, and Ephraim's not doing it. Ephraim excuses himself from physical circumcision and pretty much anything else he doesn't feel like doing. Okay, well, let me ask you a question. Is that how you are with your boss at work? You only do the commandments that he wants you, that you want to do, You only do the easy stuff. Let's just get right to the root here because we're way over time. Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 17, going through 20. Okay, this is this is perhaps one of the most ignored and most misapplied passages in all of Scripture. Okay, and let's remember, this is the very start of Yeshua's ministry. And everything else that Yeshua ever says needs to be interpreted and understood in light of this passage. And if you think you found a verse in Paul that does away with the words of Yeshua, then I invite you to rethink the situation. Okay, verse 17, Yeshua warns us not to think that he came to destroy or to do away with or to abolish the Torah or the prophets. We're talking about the written Torah that was given through Moshe or any of the prophets, because those are all what? Why? They're records of what the voice of Elohim said. Don't touch those. Memorize those. Live them. Live those words. He's saying he did not come to abolish or destroy them, but only to fulfill the first part of those prophecies. Verse 18, he says, "For surely I say to you," talk about a doubling, okay, "until heaven and earth pass away, nothing will pass from the written Torah that was given to Israel by Elohim through Moshe." Okay, the written Torah, we got not the oral Torah, the written Torah that was given through Moshe until all of what is prophesied has been fulfilled, including the return of Joseph, including the Genesis 35 alliance, including the restoration of our 12-tribe nation. Those things have not happened yet. So the written Torah, the Tanakh, and the prophecies are still for today. Verse 19, "Whoever, therefore, breaks one of the least of these commandments," like tithing, like organization, like building him a kingdom, like doing what he asks us to do, like the Great Commission, like unifying on a single foundation of apostles and prophets, little stuff like that. There's, and teaches men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, well, is that your, for how many in Ephraim is that the goal? Is to be the least in the kingdom of heaven. Because most of Ephraim's on track, if they even make it home. Most of Ephraim is on Isaiah 10 and verse 22 track. We're trying to wake them up. If you're not doing everything the voice of Elohim ever said, you're on the wrong track. Right? But whoever does and teaches the need to build a Jewish millennial reign for Yeshua, according to all of his protocols and according to all of his halakha, who's faithful to the faith that was delivered once for all the saints, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Okay. Any men out there in Ephraim who want that for themselves and their families? Verse 20. For the one who will intercede for us or not says to us, so Yeshua, he says to us that unless our righteousness, and in context, he's talking about unless our commandment keeping, unless our obedience to the written Torah of Moshe, to the Tanakh, exceeds the commandment keeping of the Karaites and the Orthodox, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Why? Because you're by no means building the kingdom of heaven that Yeshua Nagid, Mashiach Nagid, said to build. He came to show us how to keep the Torah, how to walk out the Torah, how to live the Torah. Do we do that? Or do we have other things? We have other priorities. And what Yeshua is saying, he's saying if you don't do everything that comes from the mouth of Elohim, you by no means are you going to enter the kingdom of heaven. And why would he say such a thing? He says, okay, in Daniel 9, starting in verse 25, we already saw that Mashiach Nagid, Mashiach the teller, Mashiach the director, Mashiach the prince. He had to come in the late Second Temple period. Verse 26, Mashiach had to be cut off before the destruction of the Second Temple. But now you have, in 5776 and 5777, you have the Sanhedrin thinking that I am the Mashiach. Okay, I wasn't born in Bethlehem. I was born in Bellevue, not too far from Bill Gates, actually. I had friends that went to school with him. Okay, the Sanhedrin thought I came as Mashiach Nagid near the end of the Second Temple period, or something like that. Okay, how many do we have in Ephraim who are taking doctrine from those who elevate the Talmud over the Tanakh? And how many do we have in Ephraim who are taking doctrine from those who can't see Yeshua in Daniel 9 and verse 25? You know, I'm not talking about learning from them. I'm talking about taking doctrine from them. How many do we have who forget the dangers of drinking from all the fountains? And it's not the same thing to drink from all the fountains as to find the right fountain and drink from that one. Those are two totally different things, and they lead to two totally, completely separate results. The drinking from all the fountains result, that doesn't end well. The only one that ends well is to find the right one and to dedicate yourself there. Because there's a commitment aspect to keeping Torah. If there's no commitment, there's no Torah. You're not going to keep Torah on accident. That can't happen. If you can't see Yeshua in Daniel 9, 25 and 26, then what do you really know? Okay, if you can't understand the words of Elohim, then why are you teaching the Bible? Or why are you teaching Talmud? Okay, but if you are claiming Yeshua, you're claiming Daniel 9, 25, 26 speaks of Yeshua, that means you get to disobey his words. You know he's one like Moses, and you don't have to do everything that he says. Oh, but we know you have to keep all the words of the Torah, or else you're liable to death at the witness of 2 or 3 witnesses. Oh, Yeshua, but you don't have to keep Yeshua's words, right? Why? What was that? What kind of reward do we get for disobedience and disloyalty to Yeshua and his commandments? What kind of reward do we get for disobedience and disloyalty to the prophecies of Elohim? So the point, brothers, is not that we're doing everything perfectly and everyone needs to be just like us. The point is that none of us have arrived. But the thing is, the difference is there's a less than 1% out there right now in today's times who are trying to do everything Yeshua said to do. And then there's seems like a 99% that doesn't really care. So out of concern for people, because we don't want to see people die. We know the vast majority will die, but we don't want you to be one of them. We want you to be one of the ones who chooses to make a real commitment in the spirit, that changes their life and says, you know what? This is what I need to be doing to show my love for Elohim. Question, brothers, because we know that many people are out there drinking from all the fountains. If you're not going to commit yourself to Yeshua and you're not going to commit yourself to building his kingdom, then what are you doing? Do you think you're smarter than Yeshua? Or do you think you're smarter than Moshe? Yeah, because it kind of seems like most of Ephraim thinks he's smarter than Yeshua, because most of Ephraim seems to keep finding excuses for not doing exactly what Yeshua said. It's like, well, it must be some pretty smart fellers. Must be pretty mighty high IQ score for them, to know more than Yeshua. To realize that you don't really need to do all Yeshua said to do, and everything's just fine. Okay. And the problem is that the biggest challenge for returning Ephraim is to maintain Yeshua's standards. And what we don't need is people attempting to water down Yeshua's standards, whether it's to build a tithing base for themselves or for whatever reason. We do not need people watering down the standards, the goals, the vision that Mashiach Nagid himself established. We don't need people omitting the Great Commission. I don't know how many Messianic leaders and teachers I've talked with and tried to help them understand that what they're doing, how does it build Yeshua's kingdom? It's the good news of the kingdom. How are we helping to reestablish a single faith, a single organized nation that obeys the faith once delivered to the saints? And it's like, I don't even know if it goes in one ear and out the other, just bounces off, or what it does, because nothing changes. Sometimes it's yellow rock, sometimes it's gray rock, sometimes they blow sunshine, but they keep watering down Elohim's standards. Oh, and there's money coming in. They seem to be building a tithing base for themselves. Oh, they seem to be building an income base for themselves. Oh, I see. And I do understand it does take money to run ministry. I get that. It's more expensive than you think by a lot. But what is the thing, brother? As long as the tithing base comes in, as long as the money's coming in, you don't need to worry about the Great Commission. You don't need to worry about the fivefold ministry. You don't need to worry about the foundation of apostles and prophets in Ephesians 2. You don't need to worry about standards. You don't need to worry about what Yeshua said. You can just teach contrary to Yeshua, anything of the sort. Why? Because, in the Esav model, the Torah can change. It's one of the things they share with Judah. So then you end up with people who believe they're disciples, and then basically they talk a great game, but when you take a look at what they're doing, it's all for them and none for Elohim. Oh, small detail. The knife twist is that they do exactly what Esav does. Esav teaches enjoying our lives in the world because of Jesus and his sacrifice. And in our wonderful human wisdom, most of us in Ephraim are still completely ignorant of the fact that Ephraim's basically in a position of needing to make friends with brother Judah to get the Genesis 35 alliance recognized, and then for Joseph to come home. Joseph basically needs to show Judah through his actions and not just his talk that he's not Esav and doesn't behave like Esav. It's not just the same woman in a different dress. Okay, so we need to show brother Judah that the Protestant Reformation actually meant something. Oh, we claim Yeshua is our Rebbe. Do we behave like it? And what do? Are we going to continue to behave like Esav? Or we're going to start to behave like Yeshua? Not just mouthing Yeshua, not just spouting Torah, but actually starting to walk it. Oh, because it matters. Oh, and because our intercessor is going to expect it of us in the day of judgment. You don't do it for love, at least do it for fear. We'll talk all about it in the Abraham Accords series, but some things are better in Protestantism and other things got much worse. Organization went out the window. Discipline, to the word, went out the window. Not that Esav had much discipline to the word. But the problem is it's so bad that the majority in Ephraim even gets excited about voting. And as we're going to see in the Abraham Accords series, voting comes straight out of Babylon. It's effectively the political branch of the mystery Babylonian system. Kind of like you have the Israeli Knesset, the political arm, giving money to the Talmudists in the yeshivot so they can continue studying pedophilia and how to enact a global pedophilia and Josephite slavery state. That's all written about in the Talmud. We'll see that in the documentary. So not just Amalek is trying to knock us out, brothers. There's 3 other horses and there are many other demons, and they're all trying to knock us out. We will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Because why? Because Satan wants to knock us out. And his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, and his people are destroyed for not doing what they know how to do. Judah and Levi want to kill or enslave us so they can have their way with our women and our babies. 3 years old in one day. It's kind of like a civilized ISIS with tuxedos. It's strictly business, old chap. And if you don't like it, you're anti-Semitic, right? Talk to the hand. Ephraim, men and brothers. How do we expect to survive the coming wrath when we continue to justify not even obeying the minimum standards that both the written Torah and Yeshua and the Brit Chadasha say to obey? Are we obeying Matthew chapter 5 and verse 20? Is our obedience to the Torah really better? When we get to the judgment, are we going to hear, well done, good and faithful servant? Or are we going to hear, why didn't you do everything that my son and I said to do? Why didn't you do the things my son said to do when he took your death? He died for you so that you might live for him. You say that you love him. If you love him, why did you not do all that you could for him with your life? If you served him, if you were his servant, why did you not keep his commandments? Why did you not use your mina to build his kingdom with all of your heart, according to his word, on a single foundation of apostles and prophets? Well, there's much more to say, brothers, but we're way over time. We needed to discharge our duties as watchmen on the wall. It isn't nice to say, but the burden for your blood is now on your head. And I pray with all of my heart that you will make the right choice for yourselves and for your families before Yahweh Elohim Tsevaot. I pray that you will make the right choice to obey his word and not to elevate anything above his word. That you'll make the right choice to hear and obey his voice and incorporate everything his voice is ever recorded as having said, that you will take it as your own. And I ask you that you do this to save the lives of yourself and your families. Not that you can save them, but you can bring yourself into alignment with Yahweh Elohim, and then he will want to save you. And then when there's a need for intercession, your intercessor will be there for you. And that's the most important thing I can think of to say to the house of Ephraim today. Shabbat Shalom.